Okay. It's 5:01. We're going to call the meeting back to order. Next item is we're going to get into the public hearings. The first item is Resolution 22-32, which is the final fiscal year 2022-2023 ad valorem millage rate. And this is a resolution of the Town Council of the Town of Fort Myers Beach adopting the final ad valorem millage rate for the Town of Fort Myers Beach, Florida for fiscal year 2022-2023, commencing October 1st, 2022, and ending September 30th, 2023, for the purpose of providing sufficient funds for the general fund and providing an effective date. It's my understanding that we're going to table this item until do we discuss the budget?
You can discuss it now if you'd like, but it will need to be tabled before you make a vote on it.
Does the council wish to discuss this millage rate before the budget? If not, is there a motion to table this?
I'll move we table the millage rate.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Any objection? The motion carries unanimously. Okay, so we'll go to item B, which is Resolution 22-33, which is the final fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. And this is a resolution of the Town Council of the Town of Fort Myers Beach adopting the final budget for fiscal year 2022-2023, commencing October 1st, 2022, and ending on September 30th, 2023, and providing for an effective date. So we'll discuss the budget. I'll open it up to the council here for discussion.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, there's one thing that I've learned from the last meeting that I've spoken with Roger about, but I just wanted to bring it up, and it's revolving the community policing part. As it's listed inside the add-on items, it's listed as 40,000 from the general fund. But when you look in the blue sheet, it is actually allocating the funds that are set aside for additional police patrols for holiday weekends that we have done for years. So I kind of have a little bit of a dilemma with that. I don't think that we should be taking money away from one aspect to apply to another. So I don't know what the way to do that. Maybe Roger, you could help opine in on this as to what we would need to do to not take away from those funds that we have set aside to add the extra police patrol that we have for the holiday weekends.
Well, I think we could, see where we land with some of these other items, and it may take care of itself. And if it doesn't, then we could discuss it.
I think, didn't you tell me, Roger, that we can't use this community policing as staffing for these auxiliary events for the holiday weekends and whatnot? They're separate.
Well, I think the better thing to do is to see if we get through everything else, and that's the only issue left to resolve. I'll be thinking about how we could potentially resolve that. And of course, if something else gets reduced, it'll solve its own problem.
Yes, ma'am.
If we do pass community policing, we would have to enter into negotiations with the sheriff's department anyway. I think it would probably be some period of time before we would reach a contract with them about what priorities we wish them to deal with. So I'm thinking that probably a quarter of the year would have passed anyway, so that might take care of most of what your concern is, Dan. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it certainly might. I just would like it to be clear and upfront that we're not going to take from those funds that we use every year to provide the traffic police and any other police stuff that we've done for years in the back. I just want to make it clear that I don't want to take funds away from that for this, because it's two separate issues in my mind. They're two separate items.
Unless we included it in the contract that we do with the sheriff for the community policing, that we ask them to use community police for those events rather than the regular staff?
Well, the issue then I think what we have is if you pull off the community police officers to put them on traffic duty, they're not there to do what community policing is set forth to do. And that's to interact with the community and to help alleviate some of the issues that our staff can't take care of. So it just, to me, doesn't make sense to take the deputies that we'd have that are there to do community policing to do something that, as I said before, we've done in the past for years, allocated funds to be able to provide that service.
I think we're talking past each other.
But no, I think,
Well-
there's different things there. One is the parking direction, and I know it won't happen this year, but when we get the road redone, will we still need to have police out there directing traffic at the crosswalk?
Yeah, that's, just to be clear, that's a different, we have two programs with the sheriff's office.
Okay,
One is traffic control, which is on the foot of the bridge, and we have voice, and we have police officers, and we have that operation. And then we help the sheriff's office up staff for holidays, and so they bring additional resources onto the island, and we have helped them up staff that activity for holidays and other types of, events.
are those both out of the 40,000, or are these separate items?
The traffic control is paid by the secondary gas, by the gas tax, not secondary gas tax, but by the gas tax, the part that the county's reducing our formula. And this part is paid by the general fund.
And I think we can all agree that these funds, this 40,000 for the special detail, it has been money well spent over the last couple of years. We haven't had any major incidents. We haven't had any really big minor incidents. It's the money has been, what we spent on those extra details, I think has been a very good investment for the town, as well as our residents and the visitors. We haven't had to read about Fort Myers Beach or see Fort Myers Beach on the news for something that could have happened should we not had that extra detail there.
Now, am I then correct in assuming, Roger, that the gas tax that we're getting less of this year, that's restricted? So we could use that for traffic, but we couldn't use that for sheriffs for holiday stuff? And what was the number again? How much are we losing this year for the
112,000.
112?
Change.
And will that number go up, do you know, in future years?
No. No, we got smacked down on that, as you recall.
I was talking to a counselor from Sanibel, and they said, I think this year they're going to lose 600, but they're expecting 800 in a few years, which would be their loss.
Okay, just procedural here. I was thinking maybe we could just go, instead of jumping around all over the board with these, if we just want to start at the top with these add-ons and we can vote on them as we go, just go down the list. Is that
Well,
agreeable?
I guess rather than doing it individually, I would state the premise that I took last time was that I was willing to compromise. I have not been a proponent of community policing, but if everybody agreed that we were going to do all of the things that we needed to do and have the increase, then I would go along with it. I wouldn't vote against the community policing if we did all of the add-ons and we did the amount of tax increase that we needed to accomplish those things. So my intent would be, like I said, to go with the tax increase, but then vote for all of the projects that we have discussed as being good for our town. But if people start pulling out of voting for the money that's necessary to pay for things, then I'm probably going to change my position on the community policing issue.
Well, you're certainly entitled to move that position if you'd like, to get it off the dime here. That's up to you.
I'll tell you, when I look at this budget, and the money that was raised from the increased parking after the parking app is in here. So that's money that we actually had talked about using for cost overruns for our capital projects, but it's now in this mix. I'm kind of reminded of, I was listening to sometimes of an analyst talk about healthcare, and he said that you can have cheap healthcare, you can have it quick, or you can have it quality. You can have two of those three, but not three. It seems to me with we want everything now in this budget. I think that I look at like the Amber streetlights and this 500,000. I think that if we say, okay, in this next year, we're going to do the street light design and just pay for that design, that's probably $150,000 instead of 500. Instead of saying we want it all now, I think that, a little bit of discipline will say that we can, if there's something we can do without this year and put it into next year, I think that's something we should consider.
Well, I guess the same could be said then about workforce housing using that same argument. The $380,900 on top of the increased fees that we just passed. The appearance is obviously there that we're trying to do it all now, or at least, make up for lost time. So, I mean, I guess if you're going to use that argument, I've tried to prioritize these things as to, what in my mind, the community wants from top to bottom. And I don't have an issue with the items that are in here. The 380,000, it was my understanding that money came from the increased fees from last year. So I questioned as to why it was in here as an add-on if we've collected the fees or we're going to collect the fees. But, we have to work within a budget, and if we have to cut some things out of here to keep the millage rate from going up, as I stated at the last meeting, there's places that we can make up that $171,000 in here to at least not increase the millage rate and still get everything that we want. May not get the exact furniture that we want for, say, Bay Oaks, but at least in the times that we're dealing with now with the economy the way it is, and all the fees that have changed and the property values and everything we all know about, we don't need to rehash. I think it's important that we try to at least keep the millage rate at the 0.95 and find a way through this add-on list to trim down that $171,585 to be able to work within that budget.
But you understand, Dan, we talked about it before, that the money raised by those fees, you can't just use it in the general fund.
I understand that. But the current fees, so I guess my question is of the $380,900, that money is not coming from the recently passed fees, correct?
If your question is that include the $100 per bedroom fee? The answer is it does not.
But does it include the fees collected
Okay.
from last year?
It includes what we anticipate would from the fee increase for one full year. That's what that number.
And then the increase that was imposed for the parking. Refresh my memory as to what that money was earmarked for. And where is that in here?
Well, so if you recall, we have $2,760,900 available for the add-on list. $1,079,000 of that comes from under expenditures from this fiscal year 22 and over revenues from this fiscal year. Then on top of that, after the parking app and charging station, you have after accounting for those expenses, you have $1,138,000 in parking fees. You have the short-term rental revenues we talked about, and $172,000 from the potential millage increase. So those are the things that make up that $2,769,000. And obviously, if you do things that affect those things, you'll have less money to spend.
So then, the parking fees in excess of the parking app, those are in this revenue, the funds available for the add-on list. Is that right? It's not
Yeah,
put in a separate.
Yeah, though, if you recall with the parking fees, we took the baseline of what we made before you adjusted them,
Mhm.
okay? And then there's the incremental increase of that adjustment that we're using towards the add-on list, yes.
And so the extra fees from the short-term rentals, is that also in this funds available?
The increase excluding the rooms, yes, but not the room charge is not calculated.
Right, so from the change last year, the difference in income from the change last year is in this funds available.
Yes, well, we speculating at this point, or estimating, if you want to use that word, is $381,000.
So that the money is added and then it's taken away.
Well, it's added, and you're telling us by policy, you want us to set it aside, at least at the fire hearing, you said you want us to set that aside for workforce housing. So yeah, it has to be in the budget to realize it, but we're not going to spend that on anything else but workforce housing unless you direct us otherwise.
Right, I'm just trying to be clear on where these numbers come from. So the funds available for the add-on list includes money from the short-term rental fees that are limited in the scope of where we can use them. And then as a matter of accounting,
Sorry about that.
just as a matter of accounting, you have it on the add-on list that is essentially putting it into a fund.
That's my understanding of what you've directed
Right.
us to do.
Okay, so the money is there just to take it out because it's limited in the scope of what you can use it.
And I guess my question, as I raised to Roger, and maybe I'm just not understanding, is if that money was already allocated and we cannot use it for anything else, why did it have to go in as an add-on list item versus its own line item? If that money has been received and it has been allocated to that specific, that specific bucket, if you will, for workforce housing, I'm struggling with understanding why it's being listed as an add-on item.
Well, with each new fiscal year, if the fee remains the same, we'll realize that amount of money. But if you want us to cross it out for the list, we can, but you would reduce your total available by that amount of money. So it's there for
Well, and-
information, but if you,
I think it's just a way to display the information. Doesn't really
you know,
change
but
anything.
if you, it doesn't change anything. If you want us to take it off, we'll take it off.
I understand that, but my point is, we've been told that because we have earmarked it for workforce housing, that we cannot use it for anything else. So yeah, I understand how it lowers the available money to do the projects that we want, but I don't understand why it has to be seen in there as an add-on item.
If you don't want to see it there, like I said, we could cross it off and we'll just adjust the $2,760,900 down by the equivalent amount.
Just a way to display the information. So if you take it out of there, you got to take it out of the funds available and it really has no effect at all on the bottom line.
Well, I guess what my bigger point is, if we want to discuss to keep the millage rate at where it's at without raising it, that's not an item that we can even discuss, is what I'm being told, to take funds from.
That's my understanding too.
Well, that's something for you to debate with your colleagues, but
But there are legal limitations on what we can do with that money, Roger, right?
you can't use it for anything, but you can use it for some things.
And what would those some things be?
Code compliance related information, registration activities, things of that nature.
So, okay, I understand.
And I think that part of it is, my understanding is there's got to be kind of a nexus. And with parking, it's much broader, because you can argue that people who are paying for parking also are driving on the streets. They're also, using certain facilities. So, the scope of what the fees can go for parking is greater than what they can go for a short-term rental registration fee.
When I understand that. My question from the beginning, though, was of the increased fees from the parking, is that on the left-hand side there in the blue where it says parking, that 1.4 million? Does that 1.4 million include the increased fees that we raised last year? And the money that was generated from parking, is that included in that parking?
Say that again?
So the increased fees, over what we made the year before we raised the rates for parking from $3 to $5. That additionally generated revenue, is that encompassed in that parking line item that's under the revenues in the blue on the top left-hand side, the second line item down? Is that increased fee that we calculate, that we've accumulated since the increase, is that included in that 1.4 million?
The 1.4 million in parking revenues is reduced by $240,000 for the app and charging stations, which leaves you $1,138,000.
I think the answer, I
Okay.
heard that the answer is yes, that 1.4 is total parking revenue, including the increase fee.
I didn't hear a yes, but if that's what you heard.
That's my interpretation. Then he just went further and said that the funds available are not the 1.4 million because there's already things that have been spent from it based on last year's budget.
I still haven't heard Roger say yes.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to say yes. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you're asking me.
So if we go into and I don't know what page it's on, I wish I did off the top of my head, but there's a line item that says the revenue that was projected to be earned from the parking for the past previous years, and then what we raised this year. I'm just trying to figure out how much money was generated from the park, just specifically from the increase in the parking,
Just specifically from the increase?
just specifically from the increase.
I'm sorry, I don't have that number. Maybe we can get it for you, but I know that the way we've always looked at parking is after we pay the staff who work in the parking operation, that comes off the top of the revenue, and the rest of the revenue historically has gone to the general fund. And like I said earlier, we believe that number is $1,378,000 for 23, less the 240 you spent on the parking app and charging station. So that leaves you a net $1,138,000. If you want me to back into that number, I'll have to go try to find what we spend on staff to get the gross number.
No, I guess I just wanted to know how much money was raised from the increased fees over the previous years, not including what was taken out for the parking app and the charging stations. I wanted to know if the increased fee covered the parking app and the charging stations.
Yes.
So there was enough revenue generated to cover those two
Yes.
for this fiscal year. So next year, we won't obviously have these two fees. So I'm just trying to figure out with the increase that money, since we've earmarked money for workforce housing through increased fees. I'm just wondering if there's an appetite to try to get that increased fee to be earmarked for something specific, or you're telling me that we can't do that?
Well, I just wanted to clarify one thing. When we went forward with the parking app and the charging station, we did it out of 23, we used 23's money in advance, if you will, knowing that, we were going to have that money. So I just want to be clear about that. It's a general fund revenue. You can create as many silos as you wish. It's up to you. You want to silo, if the council agrees to silo money for a particular item, that's a debate among the five of you to have.
And also Dan, I'm just doing some quick math in my head. If the 1.4 million is from $5 an hour, then 560K of that comes from the extra $2 an hour. Is that helpful?
It is, except I'd like to know then where the other 300,000 went.
I think
If that's the number that you came up with and you subtract the parking app and the charging stations, where is that other 300,000?
it's all in this funds available for add-on list.
It's just in the general fund.
Yes. Well, it's wherever
Okay.
you want to put it. Right now, it's part of that total. I mean, if you want to silo it for something or draw a hard line between it and some expenditure, that's something you all can talk about and decide. But right now, There's literally a bucket with 200 and if you, including the potential millage increase, $2,760,900 in it. And only of that money, the only part that's currently siloed is $380,900 for workforce housing. But you could silo other amounts if you wish to.
I, I guess I would like to see going forward, how we have things that are laid out, like the half-cent sales tax, the, public service tax, these taxes or these fees, however you want to claim them, from raising the fees and parking and short-term rental. It would be nice to see an actual separate line item of the actual amount of money that is generating, so that we could have a discussion about potentially taking that money and allocating it specifically to a certain silo, if you will. Because what I think I heard in the public comment was people would be interested. It's not so much that the fees are the issue, it's not knowing exactly where those fees are going to go. I think people have a much easier time of freeing their wallet of some money, if you will, if they can understand exactly where it's going and what it's going to be used for. And if they agree it's a good cause or not, that's a whole nother debate. And I'm sure they'd be more than happy to let us. But I think in the future, I would feel better being able to see the differences in what those fee increases caused over the last fiscal year, to be able to make a better decision, as opposed to just a big bucket. Here's what 5 people really want to see get done, and you guys can fight over which one of you isn't going to get what you want.
Well, that's your statement. I believe the information is there within the budget if you wanted to get that granular. And of course, we could spend the time to do that if you wish.
Well, I don't need to do it today. I think I'm just trying to get some thoughts out there, and I think my thoughts from the last meeting haven't changed much. I think it's important for me to stay at that 0.95 at the very minimum. And if that means that we have to take some money from Bay Oaks, as much as everybody knows I'm a big proponent of Bay Oaks and I want to see it done as much as everybody else. I think we're in a time where we have to tighten our belt straps a little bit and make some cuts or make some changes or make some things that although we may want them and the majority of the community may want them, we have to work within a specific budget. And that's kind of where I'm coming from, but I'm open to listening to what my other council members have to say.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, Dan, but what I do think that, what was it, a couple of years ago that we sat down and we scaled back Bay Oaks. And I think that was certainly looking back at it was a prudent thing to do. But I also think that a lot of the money that's going into building Bay Oaks now comes from a loan. And I think that delaying that, I'm not sure, Roger, does that have any real effect on the budget as far as, except for this, except for the additional personnel and the furniture? Does delaying Bay Oaks or scaling it back have any effect on the budget since it's all from a loan now?
Well, the FF&E and the staffing that's on the add-on list is put there under the presumption that the project's going to move forward and be built. If the council wishes to delay that and not move forward, of course, then those related expenses could be moved out as well.
Well, on that point, I don't think that we're discussing whether or not we want to move forward with Bay Oaks or we don't. I think we have to find out, one, what it's going to cost first before we can make that decision whether we have to. We come back that it could be twice as much as we thought, and we don't have the money, and that $500,000 that's there for FF&E doesn't get spent on anything. It's in the bucket and it gets carried over till next year. But that's a discussion for another day, I think. Once we can get back what the bids are going to be able to build that building, then we can have that discussion. But $500,000 to retrofit the inside of the building, I understand it's needed, but I think it's more important at this time, in my opinion, to try to save as much money for our taxpayers as we can, and make a little bit of cut. It still leaves $320,000 to be able to at least get a start. Should we move forward with building that building to fill the inside. I'm not proposing that we take the money out that's there for the personnel. I think you made a very valid point that in order to be ready, should the building be, move forward and be built, that we have the staff there to do it. They're trained and ready to go. Our Bay Oak staff does a great job, and I'm 100% behind them. And if this is what we need to keep the core services that we have, then I'm all for that. But I'm also for trying to save our taxpayers a little bit of money. And if we have to pull that 172,000 just to round up from somewhere, that's a big ticket item, and I think we could do it.
I'm puzzled by these continued comments about saving our taxpayers money. My tax bill is going to go up less than $20. I've checked with neighbors and friends around on the street. Some of them are 25, some of them are 30. I am certainly willing to pay an additional $20, $25 extra a year, $2 a month, to get all of the things that people are telling me they want. They tell me they want streetlights. They tell me they want community policing. They tell me they want to address affordable housing. I don't get the idea of trying to save my wallet $20 in a year and that we're going to hack at these things that everybody has been saying all year that they want to see accomplished. It just doesn't make any sense to me. If you want these things, then you're going to need to pay for them, and we're not asking for very much. It's not a huge tax increase. It's a very minimal tax increase. It's a small amount of money.
And I agree with that, Madam Vice Mayor. I just think that although it is a small increase on the surface, when you compile that with the increased fees, when you compile that with the increased property values, when you compile that with the gas prices, and you compile that with what it costs you to buy a gallon of milk, what it costs for these families to take their kids to school every day, all that adds up. So although this may be a very small and minimal amount on the surface to the taxpayer, it all adds up. And if there's something that we can do to help alleviate that just a little bit, I think it's the right thing to do.
I think you're thinking of people who may not live in a community as affluent as our town is. People here are not getting less milk for their children because they don't have enough money. They have enough money. And we're asking them for a very small amount that they would waste on going out and getting coffee at Starbucks a couple of times. This is not a community where people are scraping to get by. If I were in another community in Lee County that was having a tougher time, I would certainly say, yes, it's worth it to save $20 for somebody. But the people that I talk to are telling me, yes, I want street lighting. Yes, I want Bay Oaks. Yes, I want these things. And I want Bay Oaks to be nice for our town. I don't want to build a wonderful building and then put cheap, crappy furniture in it that's going to break when the kids are using it. It's a minimal amount to get the things that everybody has been telling us they want.
But I understand, Vice Mayor, what you're saying, but, part of me, and it's not the same angle as Mr. Allers, is that, there's ways to, I think, to make this work without a millage increase. And the first thing I look at is that, this $500,000 a year for amber lighting that came from talks with the county, to me is just, I don't know the details of where that money comes from, what we're going to get for. It's just putting money in a placeholder. The reality is now that if we were to approve a budget to do the design on the lights, so we knew what we were getting into specifically, and then by the time those lights could be put in, we could be in the next year's budget cycle. Seems that allocating that amount of numbers when probably the design itself is maybe $125,000, $150,000 if we were to hire someone outside to do it. Just seems like we're talking about all this nuance of things that's paying it forward down the road. I just don't think we need to have that amount of money in the amber streetlights.
Hey, if I were going to be here next year, I wouldn't want to be saying to people, well, we're not putting in the streetlights for yet another year and a half because we only allocated enough money to do the planning, but not to buy the lights. We've been arguing about these lights for 5 or 6 years or more. Let's put the money aside so that we get the plan in place and we start putting those lights up as soon as possible.
So then you're understanding where this number came from, and you think that's a good number.
I'm hoping that the amount is less, but that's what the people at the county are telling us. And I have learned not to disbelieve something that they say to me. They say something, they usually mean it. They don't change their position on it.
Well, let's be clear so we all know what we're talking about. And Council Hours, you and I have talked about this subject several times, so please correct me if I say anything that you and I haven't discussed. We have discussed the fact that in a perfect world, it would be best for Lee County to put the lights in. They've expressed to us that that doesn't fit within their core services. So the next question is, do we ask them to do it or do we do it ourselves? I believe it's in the town's best interest to ask them to do it. And as a showing good faith that the town council is going to stand behind us and fund this over multiple years, because we're going to ask them in the construction phase to advance money, potentially to do the project, that we're going to allocate not just what we need for fiscal '23, but a steady stream of $500,000 a year to see the project through until it's done. And that's back to the Vice Mayor's point of, if we're going to do it, let's do it and get it done. People have been waiting a long time for it. So that's the basis of that number. That's the number that I've mentioned to the county, and I believe Councilor Allers has as well, as a showing of commitment that they don't get started, stop, started, stop, don't know if we're serious, don't know if we're really going to follow through, to show them that we mean what we say and we're willing to put our money behind what we say. So that's where the basis of that number is. It's more than the pure cost of design. And I'm just going to stop and take a breath and let Councilor Allers add to that if he wishes to.
I think you did pretty good on explaining it as to where we got to where we're at. The number, as Roger mentioned, was a number that he discussed that he felt was something that we could work with. And in conversations with the county, they seem that, you know, at least in verbal communications, that they're comfortable with being able to work within that number. No one, including the county, knows what the final number will be of the cost. We do know that the fixture has been approved. We do know that we'll eventually end up in the tariff program, and what that dollar amount will be, we all hope will be much less than the worst case scenario. I think it will be. I think the county thinks it will be. I think FPL is on, I mean, everybody's on board, but as Roger said, you have to start somewhere. And what we're doing, let's not forget how we got to, you know, this amber lighting. It's been years of discussion of what's right, what's wrong, agreements, disagreement. We all finally agreed that this is the best course of action for the town. It's the only item on this add-on list, other than maybe the beach renourishment, that affects every single person that lives, rents, eats, sleeps, drives, visits this island. Every single person uses Estero Boulevard. So to me, it's a very important item. It's a safety issue. As Madam Vice Mayor said, we've been discussing this for far too long. We have an avenue that all the entities that are involved seem to agree would be a good path to get it done, the quickest, the safest, and potentially the cheapest. So I don't feel that number should change. As I said before, and I don't want to keep reiterating myself, but you know, I'm a Bay Oaks fan through and through. You know, I've been involved in the Bay Oaks committee since the very beginning.
Dan, I don't mean to interrupt. Let's stick with one item at a time here before you go on. So, you know, what I also heard you say is this 500,000 that we budget for, and that, you know, the may trigger a property tax raise is because we're using a worst case scenario. And does that make sense in our budget to use a worst case scenario without, I mean, it also says we don't know the details.
We don't know the details of workforce housing either, but we're putting money aside for that. What's the difference?
Well, the difference is that we're putting aside money that's generated in a specific way towards it. It's not like we're allocating a budget and then trying to figure out, you know, if we need to raise property taxes for it.
Well, that's my point. We don't need to raise taxes. We can get everything we want here and not have to raise taxes.
Well, part of the point here, Dan, is that if you don't want to raise taxes, we've got to cut back on things. And that means compromise. That means everybody has to consider what's important to them and if we can cut back on that. And so I think that kind of, constantly deflecting towards Bay Oaks, because, as much as I understand, that's probably a fairly general number. I don't know how worst case it is. But the idea of spending all this time and money to build a building that's going to be unused because we didn't allocate money to equip it, gives me some pause.
Well, and I can appreciate that. And it doesn't give me any joy by saying, I think this is where the money should come from to keep the taxes where they're at or from going up. It's we don't even know where Bay Oaks is yet. We know we want to build it. We hope we can build it within the budget that we have. But I think we're all realistic to know that that's probably not going to happen. As I said before, look at the simple stormwater issue we had. It came back way higher than we expected. I suspect that Bay Oaks is going to be the same way. So we can still allocate money for a building that maybe it's not going to be done by next year. Maybe it takes an extra year, but it's going to be done. I think we're all on board with getting it done, but we don't know what it's going to cost to do that. So for me, of all the add-on items, I want to make sure everybody can get, when I say everybody, I mean everyone in the community that has told us that these are the things that are on this add-on list that are important to us, that everybody at least gets something.
So Roger, how much money do we need to take off of this add-on list in order to not raise the taxes? I mean, is it just that 171?
Well,
Bottom of page 256, if you go back to the millage rate with the 3-2 vote, it looks like 600, when you add the amounts together, I've got over $600,000.
That we need?
no, I'm not quite there. I think if you want to keep the millage rate at 0.95, the add-on list total would go down to roughly $2.6 million.
Okay, so we're 160, so 161.
Excuse me, I was looking at the rollback rate.
That's okay.
It's still a chunk of change. You're going to have to cut some stuff.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and I know I've talked to Allison about this. The 4 additional personnel needed with the new building. I'm not convinced, honestly. I think that we also had Karen come in from Borcab and say that they only need 1 additional person to have that to keep the other building open. So I'm still kind of at a loss of why we need the 4 people. And I think it's maybe worthwhile to go back to Borcab and say, can they value engineering their operation? Because right now things are logically set up where they have a gym in the old building, which means it's got to be open for walk-ins. They have basketball court, which means it has to be open for walk-ins all the time. And then they have their active recreation there, and they separate that logically and put the passive recreation in the new building. If there's a way we can put more in the new building, have the less building open less, is there a way we can bring that number of needed personnel down? I think it's worth making the effort to do a value engineering so we can get close to the same amount of service with less money, particularly for the operations, because the operation is going to be around, it's recurring. But the other thing is now we're if we do that, we're down to close to $100,000, $115,000. One thing we could do is we could split the difference, take half of that out of the street lighting, half out of the FF&E. In the spirit of compromise, and we're there without the tax increase.
I
Right,
believe I
well,
was showing the spirit of compromise by voting for the community policing. It's not something I wanted, but in order to get the things that I wanted, I was willing to vote for that. And in exchange, a very small tax increase to accomplish all of the things that we've wanted to do.
And I'm really not convinced about the community policing myself. Because like I said, we haven't negotiated anything. We don't really know what it is we get. We've gotten general ideas, concepts, but there's really not a lot of specificity in what we get for that 250,000. And I'm also reminded
Workforce
that,
housing.
sorry.
I'm listening. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I'm also, I looked at the numbers for Sandoval. They have their own police force. And I've been out there a number of times on my bike. I don't recall ever seeing a sheriff, and they pay the same amount towards the sheriff as we do. there's no way to verify that we pay for community policing and we don't get less than our regular complement.
I'm willing to hear from,
Roger, is there,
from here and.
is there any way,
It does-
what's the balance on the $10 million loan right now? We've drawn down how much for, Bayside? Round numbers.
I don't know, I'm gonna guess.
Say we did 900,000 there?
I'm gonna guess between the design for the three
Design.
properties and I'm gonna guess it's 8-ish, but
8-ish. And, what did we originally budget, that project at Bay Oaks for?
well, so I think one of the things that you have to bear in mind is that we always assumed that we were going to get some grants. So we've gotten some. In fact, I think I sent you a note. We just got $485,000 for Times Square
Right.
again. So as we get more grants, Times Square is the easiest of the three projects to get grants for. As we get grants for Times Square, what that does is allows us to spend more money towards Bay Oaks. So
That's what I'm getting at. Is there any reason why we couldn't go forward with Bay Oaks this coming year?
well, again, the budget is a plan.
Right.
Now, if you want to plan for best case scenario, you could plan for the worst case scenario, and you could plan for, win some, lose some. That's up to you all. I think, as you look at this list, and by the way, and I just want to be clear about this is really important. Anything you do to reduce your income this year is going to have a compounding effect next year. Okay, so let me just digress a second and talk a little bit about next year. Assuming the staff does the same good job and has is able to have additional revenue and or savings of $1.1 million next year. You're looking at another $1 million for sand. You're looking at another $500,000 for lighting. You're looking for the rest of whatever staffing level you think is appropriate at Bay Oaks, assuming that opens. You have the operation and maintenance of the new Bay Oaks building once that opens. You're going to walk into next year with very little money if you put the screws to yourself this year. But that's up to you all. If there are not votes for a particular millage rate, pick a millage rate that there are the votes for, and let's find out what it is, and we'll figure out then what we have to cut.
Jim, any thoughts?
Well, my comments last week were premised on the fact that everything on the add-on list was a priority to one or all of the members of the council. And my philosophy was, if we are going to do these things, unlike our friends in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the aisle, we're not going to put it on the backs of our kids and grandkids, and we're going to pay for it. If the five of us can reach accommodation on some savings here, I'm comfortable doing that. But if we can't, and we are going to keep all these on, because as Roger said, beach renourishment's is $1 million extra next year. Lighting's an additional $500,000 next year. So this is going to keep haunting us. Now, those are projects that will eventually be paid for, probably in the next 2 or 3 years. My philosophy is such, and let's not forget that we're losing $112,000 annually on the local option gas tax or gas tax agreement. So we've got some challenges next year and the following year. things start to look much brighter, and people are going to be rightfully skeptical, but I'm comfortable rolling this back after we take care of these major expenditures, particularly beach renourishment and lighting on Estero Boulevard, because we'll also be gaining some additional revenue once Margaritaville comes online from a property tax standpoint. So I just think, again, if the collective body here wants to make some appropriate reductions, that's fine, because I think it's important that we show that we're all, biting the bull a little bit here. But at the same time, this is going to continue to haunt us for the next couple of years. And if we're going to do this stuff, I just think we ought to pay for it.
So to paraphrase you, you're willing to bite the bullet now with the possibility of a rollback in a couple of years down the road to get it back to where we are.
Once we take care of these are in essence one-time expenditures that'll take us a couple of years to pay for, the beach renourishment and the lighting.
Right.
But once those are paid for, I would be absolutely thrilled to roll this back at the appropriate time, because you'd have that and any sort of inflationary issues that you deal with, you'd still have increased valuation. If you didn't have that, you've got Margaritaville coming online. So we've got some good things coming down the road. But these initial one-time expenditures, the beach renourishment and the lighting, are significant. And everyone has told me these are priorities for Island. Beach renourishment, of course, only where it's wanted and appropriate and needed, but it's still a significant expenditure. Even if that goes down a little bit, we're certainly going to be spending $1 million for the next budget cycle, and probably another $1 million for that, in addition to the state and TDC money. So I just want to, if I don't mind reducing our wants, but I just want to, if we aren't going to reduce our wants, I want to make sure we pay for it appropriately. But again, I'm certainly open to rolling it back later.
So,
I guess I'll add just a little bit to that. I'm not opposed to biting a bullet. I'm opposed to biting several of them. And it seems that this year has been a perfect storm of bullets being eaten. And although some of it is not within our control, inflation, obviously, higher rates for gas, all that stuff is not within our control. Some of this stuff that we are now faced with on an add-on list here, were certainly within our control and previous council's control, and weren't addressed and weren't taken care of. And now we're at a point where the 5 of us have to make hard decisions on either paying for lack of progress, for lack of better words, from the past, or
I'm going to interject here, having been on in the past. The beach renourishment used to be paid for by the TDC. That was a surprise when that whole funding structure changed. I expected that Lee County was going to pay for more of the streetlights because it's their road, but they aren't. So these two things were not caused by past councils not acting appropriately. They are surprises and changes that have come upon us. Those are the two big numbers.
And I don't think that the street light solution has only been available for a couple of months. If we would have gone with something 3 years ago, it would have cost way more than that. We'd have need twice as many poles on the street. So I think that, it's not that previous councils didn't act on it. The technological solution was not available to previous councils.
well, I mean, I guess I'm not trying to create an argument here. We keep tap dancing around workforce housing, and that's more specifically what I was referring to. Housing has always been an issue, at least as long as I've been here. It hasn't gone anywhere but up. And I'm just as much to blame. I've been on council for 2.5 years and we haven't done anything about it. So I'm certainly not pointing the blame at any specific council or any specific person. It was just a general comment that because of things from the past and unforeseen things that have happened over the last couple of years, we are finding ourselves in a position where we either have to give something up or we have to charge more money at a time where we have charged more money through fees, where we have, I just don't want to keep reiterating. And I think I've made my point as best as I can and my position as best as I can. And I'm willing to negotiate on some of these things. I don't think there's anything that's in that add-on list that can't be looked at as something that potentially can have a little bit out of it. But You know, if we're going to talk specifically about beach renourishment, that is what it is. We know what that cost is. The plan is in place for it. Amber street lighting, the plan has been put in place, or at least talked about what the plan would be, to then allocate money for it to implement that plan. Workforce housing, we're putting money aside. I think that's great. Although we don't have a plan as to how we're going to use it or where we're going to get. We haven't communicated, as far as I know, with any other outside entity, the county, developers, anybody, landowners. We're just putting money in the piggy bank, which I'm not opposed to. And then we've got, like I said, Bay Oaks. It's something that we haven't even gotten a cost yet to see what it's going to cost to build. But if we learned anything from Bayside Park, what we've seen at Times Square, what we've seen with the stormwater increase to do the side streets, it's going to cost a lot more money. And where is that money going to come from? We could say we're going to raise the taxes now, and it is a minimal amount, and I understand all that. But then when we get the bids and next year we're forced with something that could potentially be 10 million, then what? Then what do we do? So I'm just trying to look at the bigger picture. I understand that, you know, next year we could be in a, you know, but we don't know what next year is going to be. You know, prices could dramatically drop. I don't see that happening, but they could go up. I'm just trying to get everybody something that they want, and still try to work within a reasonable budget.
And, you know, I'll say to you that, because the one thing you haven't talked about is, you know, the whole community policing doesn't have unanimous support among the council. You know, it's a compromise, to be able to put that in.
Do any of these add-on items have unanimous support? And we're all going to be giving up something to get something.
And that's why I think since we all are giving up something to get something, we do the add-ons for this very minimal amount. It's a compromise. All of us are compromising.
I have to say that that has weighed into my strategy. There has been compromise on community policing, which I appreciate, which gives me a little more peace about voting for a modest millage rate increase, because that's an ongoing expense, not just this year. It'll be next year, the following year. I think it's money well spent, but we got to pay for it. But if we lose community policing, then I'm going to have a hard time voting for this budget and the millage rate increase. But again, I think collectively we've done a nice job of compromising, and we're not just compromising. We're including items that have, at least to my knowledge, been universally embraced by this island for the most part. I'm sure there's a few detractors out there, but on beach renourishment and sterile beach lighting and community policing, at least the folks I encounter have been extremely supportive of those items, and that's fine. And I think I support them as well. And I sit home for years and gripe about Washington D.C. not paying for things, and then putting it on the backs of our kids and grandkids. And I gripe about both parties, and I'm just not going to do it here. So if we're going to do these things, we're going to pay for them. At least that's my philosophy. And if we're not, that's fine. We're going to have to make the appropriate cuts. And I'm open to that. But if these items are going to stay on, and they need to stay on in order to get a compromise of all the members of the council, I understand the compromise piece is an important piece of the puzzle. Sometimes folks don't realize the dynamics that are involved here, but there has been some give and take by the council on some of these items, and particularly community policing, which I appreciate. And that I think that needs to go both ways, and that's why I've been supportive of this modest millage rate increase. So, but if we lose community policing, I hope we don't. That might change my perspective. Or if we lost a sterile beach or sterile boulevard lighting or beach renourishment, then I would have to revisit my vote as well. But I think it's been a pretty good compromise. I have the benefit of a homestead tax credit, so it's a little bit apples and oranges for some folks out there. But again, my increase is $25.50 a year for these three items that I've heard from a great number of the citizenry about, and they're new. They're new items. The beach renourishment's new, and so is Estero Boulevard, and so is community policing, and they're great things for our community. And I think we could get them at a relatively modest cost. I know everything else is going up. It's tremendous pain. Just go to Publix. It's a painful experience. But if we say we want these things, I just think we ought to have a pay-as-we-go philosophy. And in the spirit of compromise, I do think it's a step forward for the island.
And, I'll tell you, quite frankly, Commissioner Adderholt, that, I understand, I'm not really sold, like I said, on community policing. It seems a little fuzzy to me, a little general, but I understand with your conservative credentials, and I'm sure that, that raising property tax eats to your gut like having a jalapeno salad for lunch. That it's very important to you, and you've shown your ability to really to bend.
I have never voted for a tax increase in my life, and I've been in the legislature for 2 terms in Indiana, and it's extremely painful, and I don't like it. But what I don't like even more is what's happening in Washington, D.C. So we either make the cuts and we don't raise the millage rate, but if we need to have these things in there, I think we ought to pay for it. So that's where I'm at.
Well, no one's compromised more than me. I'm the big compromiser here. I didn't want the lighting at all. I still don't believe that the town should light a county road. I don't believe it. I agree with Councilman Veach. I'm not convinced about community policing, not at all. But I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm willing to, since it's for the greater good, to put aside the funds for the lighting the boulevard. I don't agree with it, but I'm willing to do it for the greater good. So there's your compromise. There's your compromise. I'm directing that to you, Dan. You're muted, buddy.
And I appreciate it. And I know that you haven't been in favor of any of those. And, I think we've heard from plenty of people that those things are very, very important. And
I've heard from others that they're not, believe it or
of
not.
course, I'm sure.
Believe it or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't doubt you. And I've heard from people that there's things on this add-on list that don't make sense to them either. So,
Right.
We can only do what we could do and go with what we think is in the best interest of the greater community. And I think that's what all of us are trying to do. And,
I think we're almost there.
well, I haven't, we haven't had to raise any millage increases. And for me, it's just difficult to try to swallow that we're, I'm compassionate to what you said, Counselor Adelhurl, and I understand what you said. It's just, for me, it's one thing on top of another this year. And how we got here, I guess we could all argue that, but it's just a compiling thing for me. And of all of these things on here, there's just one unknown that sticks out glaringly to me that we don't know yet. And that's why I latched onto that one, because I thought that's something that maybe I could rally the troops, if you will, to get behind, to try to save some taxpayer dollars. But it doesn't sound like that is going to be the will of the majority here. So I guess we'll just continue to move forward.
So just keep in mind too, that the increased parking fees are in this mix, and without those, we'd be cutting something. So it's not just about this tax rate. So then, Dan, are you saying that you would be willing to increase the property tax rate to get this add-on list as it is?
Well, it appears to me, even if I don't, that there's, based on what we see in our blue sheet and with my conversations with the town manager, whether I vote for it or I don't, the millage rate is still going to increase. It may not increase to the fullest amount, but it would increase enough to be able to get us to where we are at with all of these things on the add-on list. Am I mistaken in that, Roger?
Well, I think that I'm looking at this sheet and it says that if there's a 4-to-1 vote, then we're back to 0.95. One person
No.
would vote for the increase. We don't get it.
No, it goes to 0.9769, and it's a difference of $56,000 in the bottom line, according to what's in our blue sheet.
Which is kind of.
Whether I vote for it or I don't.
Kind of insignificant, which would be more symbolic than anything else at this point. You agree with?
Well,
Well,
Exactly. So $56,000 is essentially what my vote would cost or save.
Right.
and we have to figure out where to take it from.
Pardon me?
We have to figure out where to take it from.
All right.
But that's another thing, Dan, that if you say you're not going to vote for it, that you want everything on the list and you're not going to vote for it, then if someone else doesn't vote for it, then we're to what, 0.881? We're down like another 250K.
Well, from what I've heard, it sounds like right now it's a 4-to-1 vote, which would mean there's a 56,000 that would have to come somewhere from somewhere, as Roger said. And I think, as I've stated from the beginning, the one thing that's in the add-on list that I think has room to move a little bit, especially at 56,000 versus 200,000, would be the Bay Oaks FF&E.
I'll tell you straight up though, Dan, that I'm not convinced about.
And that's something that I'm for.
Excuse me, Dan. I'm not convinced about this community policing, and I do not want to raise property taxes. Now, I've told you what my idea of a compromise, but you're just focused on one thing. And I'll tell you that if you decide that you're not going to vote for a rate increase, then I'm not going to vote for community policing.
And
Well, then I guess-
in everything that I've heard so far, Dan, you've gotten everything that you've asked for, except for a minor millage decrease. You haven't given up anything. You've got your community policing, you got your lighting, you got your beach renourishment, you got all your biggies, but you haven't given.
Well, I could argue that,
What have you given up?
oh, well, 2 years of getting to this point. 2 years of getting to at least where we're at a discussion that those things could be added. So I would say I've given up a lot as well. I've voted for things over the past 2 years that I wasn't 100% behind, but I did because I supported the initiatives of my fellow council members. And I'm asking to take that $56,000 from something that is very important to me, something that I was very much involved in from the very beginning, getting it to the point where it's now at least where we can get bids to get it built. So I kind of take offense to you thinking that I'm not giving anything up. I've given up 2 years of fighting for community policing. I've given up 2 years of fighting for street lighting. I've given up all these years. And mind you, had we did these 2 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about this right now. It would have been done before COVID. We wouldn't have to worry about inflation. We wouldn't have to be worried about some of the things that we're dealing with now, increased fees, all these other things that we're dealing with. That is that perfect storm that I'm talking about, is the reason we're having this discussion. And if we're $56,000 apart, that's not that far apart. But you're asking me to give up what I believe, and the majority of people that I have talked to believe, and at the end of the day, that's who we work for, have told me are important. That's what I'm fighting to do. So if that means that I'm going to get an ultimatum that either I do this or I don't get that, I don't think that's fair. And I don't think it's fair to say that I'm not giving up anything, because I think
No,
the community has given up.
Excuse me,
Well, I'm not saying you gave it to me, sir.
I gave
I'm saying that someone else just gave it to me.
sorry.
Counselor Veach gave me an ultimatum by said, if I don't do this, he's not going to do that.
Well, because
I don't think that's a great way to do it.
and in parts of it, I'm looking at, Councilman Adderholt here. He said he's willing to do this tax increase, which is the right thing to do. And just for you to want everything on this list and then say, but I'm still going to vote against the rate that pays for it. And then you have to be the only one that does that. If anybody else votes against that, then we go way down in the tax rates. We're five counselors here.
I agree. But I haven't given any of you an ultimatum like you just gave me.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to, because I think that's bad policy. I think that's a bad way to do business. I'm simply laying out there what I believe is in the best interest of the community. That's all I'm doing. And at the end of the day, if my vote, we lose $56,000, I'm trying to give an avenue of something that I've said several times is very important to me and to the community. I'm willing to take it from that area, because I think there's room for that to be absorbed. I think that's a feasible way of doing it. And I'm sorry that you don't agree with me. And I'm sorry if that changes the way that your vote's going to be just over $56,000, I can't help you with that. I have to vote in what I believe is right. And I'm certainly not going to bow to an ultimatum.
Well, I'll tell you that, part of like any budget process, including our personal finances, that, you have so much money to deal with and, it's a lot harder to make the money than it is to spend it. I think that this is a very rich budget. I'm honestly, I'm not, none of this to me is a slam dunk, as I've told you before. I think there's probably room in a lot of things. And I just don't agree with the proposals you're putting it forward, Dan.
And I can appreciate that, Counselor Veach, and I can certainly appreciate what the town manager has said as far as if we don't do it this year, we're gonna have to do it next year, and it's gonna make things worse next year. That's probably true. I don't disagree with that. But I'm trying to look at the totality of everything that we've done so far with fees and everything else, and I hate to keep reiterating it, but I'm just trying to ease the blow a little bit this year. People are smart enough that live in this town and vote and understand that next year we're going to have more things that we're going to have to deal with that could potentially cause us to have even a bigger millage rate increase. I'm certainly it's not that I don't want to raise it. It's the timing of all the other raises and all the other things that have had to be absorbed by the community. I just don't feel that it's the right time. And at the end of the day, we're talking about $56,000.
Dan, are you willing to lose community policing over this?
No, but because I don't think we have to.
Well, I'm hearing 3 people say that they are compromising for this and are willing to vote for community policing in order to get this passed in a certain fashion. So
And I think I
stand your
think
ground, you could lose your community policing.
well,
And I
and
thought
again,
that was important.
of course it's important to me. It's important to the community. That's why I've been fighting for it for 3 years.
Well, there are 3 of us, I think, who disagree with you. We don't.
And that's fine. And that's fine.
We're willing to go there on a 1-year basis to see whether it really is important or not. We're willing to give it a chance even though we disagree with it.
And I'm simply giving you an avenue that we don't have to talk about community policing. We have $500,000 in the add-on list for furniture. If we can't figure out a way to buy furniture with $56,000 less than 500,000, we've got much bigger problems than a small millage increase.
Well, I'm not sure where the
That's all I'm saying.
56,000 is coming from because I'm not sure what
Because if-
millage rate you're going to go for because the millage rate
That- the-
for a 4-to-1 vote vary between 0.8882 and 0.99769. So I don't know why everybody's glued to this $56,000 number. I don't know where that is necessarily because I don't know which millage rate below the 5-0 vote is that you want to vote for.
Well, it'd be the maximum, whether I vote for it or I don't. My understanding is if I decide I don't want to vote for it, the maximum is going to be 9,769. Is that correct, Roger?
Assuming the other 4 counselors agree, that would be correct.
So that's where I come up with it. The way it sounds is if I vote against it, it's going to be the 0.9769, which would be about $56,000 less than what it would be at the full 0.99 millage rate increase.
I don't agree.
So-
That may be an outcome, but we also may vote for 0.95.
Well, and you may.
I don't want to interrupt the colloquy, but I would just want to add one caveat. And I know we're negotiating and it's good, but if we lose community policing, I think you're going to lose Adderholt's vote. So, but I appreciate the spirit of compromise that's been put forward. So that I just want to throw that caveat out there.
I guess I would ask my fellow counselors, since everyone's been asking me, I would ask, what is the holdup as to why we couldn't lower the $500,000 down to $440,000 just for even numbers for FF&E? Why is that such a big holdup?
Why couldn't we do that with the Amber Street light? That's kind of an arbitrary number.
So is workforce housing at 380,000.
Well, that's,
So let's take
no,
it from there
isn't.
then.
It is not because that's actually money that's to come in. That's not targeted for something. I mean, that,
So is beach renourishment for that matter.
Well, exactly. So I'm trying to pick the item that is important to me. It still affects me. It still affects the community, but it's got the biggest room to absorb it. I think that makes financial sense. And, and I think it's a good compromise to, you still get a millage rate increase. We only have to take a little bit from one big bucket. And anybody that's ever bought furniture in their life has gone into a store and said, oh, I want that. And then they saw the ticket item and they're like, oh, I'm gonna go with that. It still is comfortable, it just might not be the color I want. I don't think it's that difficult.
Dan,
Everybody still
I
wins.
can't tell you how many times I've swallowed to accept community policing. I am against it to the depth of the core of my soul. I think it's a ripoff. But I am seeing it as a one-time thing. We're putting it in the budget this year. Maybe we'll find it didn't work. So I'm willing to swallow it for a year in order to get this budget passed.
I guess I'm still waiting for a response as to why you're so opposed to taking that 56,000 from the Bay Oaks FF&E.
Because I see this as a package. I don't think it's fair to hack at part of the package.
But we do it every year.
The other thing I think is honestly, a little bit disingenuous, Dan, is that you want to be the only one voting against a millage increase, but get enough of an increase to get everything you want.
Well, I think that's not true at all. I think I've been very vocal from the beginning that I think it should stay at 0.95. I'm simply pointing out the fact that if I stick to my guns and I want to keep it at 0.95, that there's still going to be a millage rate increase. That's not disingenuous. That's the facts. That's the truth.
There's another way of putting that, what Mr. Councilman Veach just said. Dan, you want your cake and you want to eat it too. You're not willing to bend. We've all bent here. You're not. You're not bending. Now, we've all gone through the process over the 3 years, Dan. You weren't up here alone. We've all been here, okay? We've been discussing these items for years. Even before you and I, before we even got here, they were discussing these items. So it's nothing new. That you want your cake and you want to eat it too. We're bending and you're not.
And I will say again, I've been bending for 2 years.
Oh, come on, Dan.
Come on.
There was no technical solution for street lighting 2 years ago. It wouldn't have cost 5-6 times the amount of this.
Doesn't mean we couldn't have started saving for it like we're doing for workforce housing. Doesn't mean we couldn't have done it then. That's my point. We could have put this money aside then, like we're doing for workforce housing. We could have found a way to put it then, but we didn't. And now we're at a point where we've increased fees, property values have gone up, and now we want to add to it with a millage rate increase. That's all I'm saying. So
Well,
I don't believe that I've bent.
The parking fees has essentially done that. Something that I think you voted against. That raises $500,000 a year.
Did.
It enables a lot of this stuff to happen.
We've all voted for things that we didn't believe in. But I'm not going to sit here and be bullied And if that changes the way other people vote, I'm sorry, I can't control that. And I think what I've laid out there is an easy fix. It's a very minimal issue that pulls from something that I've said 1,000 times. It's very near and dear to my heart. Anybody that's listened to me talk about Bay Oaks knows that's very important to me. So the fact that I am even suggesting to take a little bit of money from that bothers me. But I believe it's the right thing to do. I was voted to make the decision that I think is right for the community based on what I've heard, and that's what I'm doing.
All right, Dan. This isn't bullying you. I'm just going to lay out what's going to happen here. If you don't bend, there's 3 people on this council, the vice mayor's already said it, who are going to vote against community policing, okay? That's going to trigger our friend Councilman Adderholt here to change his vote on how everything's going. So what you're effectively going to be doing is blowing up this whole process. And we could be here for the rest of the night. And I don't see the need for that over what we're quibbling about here.
Well, I can't speak for you as to why you don't feel the need to fight for something that you believe in, but this is what I believe in. And I think it's a very minimal amount to come from something that can easily be picked up somewhere else. I think it's a good compromise to get everybody what they want. I haven't heard anybody give me a good reason as to why we couldn't take $50,000 away from the Bay Oaks furniture. All I'm hearing is that everybody hates community policing and that they're doing the community a favor by allowing it to go through on this add-on. But I haven't heard one person tell me why it's a bad idea to take $50,000 away from furniture.
Because we're all compromising, Dan. We're all compromising. You're holding out for a very, very small amount. Here, you're willing to vote for a tax increase to get things, but just not as much of a tax increase as the rest of us say we want, and we're willing to vote for community policing to get that.
But he also goes on the record as not voting for a tax increase.
But if he votes for the 0.97 or whatever, he's still going to be voting for a tax increase.
Right.
So you're still voting for a tax increase.
No, I'm not.
Oh,
No,
so
I'm not. And that's what I just clarified with Roger. If I decide I'm not voting for a tax increase, it automatically is going to go to the 0.9769 because it's already 4-1.
But that will be.
That's going to be the maximum it can
that
be.
is a tax
That is a
increase.
tax increase.
That is a.
But I didn't vote for it. So if I vote no, it's still going to stay at that 9.9769. The town managers.
We're going to go to
What
our
is
setting the tax rate, and we will vote on what tax rate to set.
And that will be the maximum it can be is 9.769 if I vote against it.
We're going to vote on this, and there's no compromise coming from honestly from you, Dan. Then I'm going to try to get a 0.95, keep the tax rate the same, and take community policing off the table. Listen, I don't want to raise property taxes. I'm not a big fan of community policing. To me, that's a huge compromise.
I'm still waiting for a good answer as to why $50,000 worth of furniture is not a good solution.
I gave you an answer, Dan. I said it's a compromise. We all are compromising. We've given a little bit here, a little bit there. You're holding out. You're the one who's holding out for the very small amount, the $56,000.
And the ability to say you voted against a tax increase.
It has nothing to do with what my ability to say. It has to do with what I think is right. And I think this is right. I think this is a compromise. I think I've stated quite eloquently that I've compromised over the last couple of years on the add-ons. I voted for things that I didn't think were in the best interest for the town, but I did it
I'm going to
because it was a compromise.
I'm not going to agree on a tax increase either.
But that's your choice. Then we'll figure it out.
Then, you know, the Bay Oaks project, back when it was being originally discussed, the plans came forward from the board cab committee, which of course you're liaison to, and it was too much. it was scaled back by the town management. Some said it was emasculated. Some resigned from the committee as a result of that. That was a compromise. That was a compromise. So we cut back, right? So now, I don't hear any of your members, your fellow board cab members, I don't see any of them here. I don't hear from them, any of them saying, you know, cut that amount out of the furniture and fixtures, cut that amount out. I don't hear from any of those people. They want this project done. They want it done. And we're not going to build a project and then do it half-a, you know, for lack of a better term. We want to do it right. We want to do it right. And to pull the money out of it now at this stage of the game is a setback. That's a setback. I mean, over so very little. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Well, I think we all can agree, Mr. Mayor, that the cost to build that building is going to be more than we anticipated. We all know it. We all know it's going to cost more money and that money's going to have to come from somewhere. We all know it's going to be a millage increase. Because where else is the money going to come from? We're going to borrow it some more? The money has to come from somewhere,
No,
right?
we still have the balance of the loan that was taken out of the $10 million. So the rest of that loan could be used for the rest of Bay Oaks. I mean, that's a possibility. And the rest of the money for Times Square is coming in. That's coming in now. So there'll be other funds available. And it doesn't, you know, maybe it doesn't happen next year. Who knows? But the funds will be available for Bay Oaks. And Bay Oaks is the crown jewel of these three projects. This is the one that the whole community is going to be able to appreciate. You know that. You know it. You're on the committee.
And don't forget that, you know, we're pulling in an extra $500,000 in parking revenue.
All right, let's get this moved off the dime here. What are we going to do?
Well, what I'm hearing is that since we can't reach a compromise here, that we're going back to the original millage rate. So I have to ask Roger, how much do we have to cut so that I can start looking at the list of add-ons and tell you what I'm willing to cut?
I believe that number would be about 170, 175.
1 million?
No, 175,000, right?
We only have to cut $175,000 to get back to 0.95.
Yes.
Well, if we cut community policing, that certainly takes care of it. Because that's the one I would cut.
You know, to me, I see community policing or, you know, just paying for the design on the amber streetlights, understanding that gets us out of sync with the county. There's probably more likelihood that we'll have to go on our own with FPNL.
How about this for a compromise? Although I don't want it to go up, and it would automatically go up, you know what, the maximum it could be would be 0.99 if it was a 5-0 vote, correct, Roger?
Correct.
And if we vote for it, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to adopt the 0.99. It could be the 0.9769, correct?
Anything below 0.99?
So from what I've heard from Councilor Adderholt is if we lose community policing, it's potentially going to change his vote,
That's correct.
which now brings us down to the 3-2 scenario, which if that would be, the max would be 0.8881 that it could be, correct, Roger?
Yes.
And now we would be talking about $400,000 that we would have to cut roughly. 450,000 out of the add-on list.
I think that's a rollback number. You would have to cut, I think, 265.5.
The Roger, just because this blue sheet is all pretty new to us. But if the motion is made to keep the rate at 0.95, that is, it just need a majority to keep it at 0.95?
For what?
Because this here it says change in property tax. If we're not changing the property tax, does it just take a majority?
I believe it's for what?
It's a 4-1. It's based on the percentage compared to the rollback rate. So it'd still be a 4-1 vote.
So anything over this applies to anything over the rollback rate.
The percentage off the rollback.
Percentage from the rollback, correct?
And by the way, so while we're gonna take a breath, I could spend 2 minutes telling you a story. This was all created by the legislature to put you all in this exact pickle.
Well done.
Well done, yeah. Sure, help yourself.
Continue without me.
So I guess what I was trying to say is if it goes to 3-2, there's going to have to be even larger cuts so whether you want to choose community policing, there's still going to be other things that have to be cut. So if we want to have that discussion before we can make a decision, I'm open to doing that. Or, I'd be willing to compromise to get to that minimum amount of money that would have to be cut, but still vote for the millage increase to ease your conscience, if you will, Councilor Beach, on me being able to say I didn't vote for a millage rate increase.
I'm
I
gonna
would
take-
then,
I'm going to take one last stab here, Dan. There are
Okay.
4 of us who agree about something.
Mhm.
You're the only one. Why should all 4 of us have to move for you?
Well, I'll say it's not about us, it's about the community. And I think that I've provided a way to give the community as much as
You
possible.
represent the community too.
That's what I'm saying. So it's not about us. Well, it's not about me. I'm trying to provide something without raising a millage rate increase. Or is it as small as possible? Let's put it that way. To be able to achieve the greatest amount of good without, I don't want to do it at all. Just like you said, you don't want to vote for community policing. I don't want to vote for any millage rate increase, but I'm willing to do it if we're willing to sacrifice a little bit of money from one specific area.
No, you're
So
not.
I'm
You're talking about voting against it. That's not voting for an increase. That's voting against it. That's what the -1 means. Now, a question for you, Councilman Adderhold. If we were to not have community policing and have a motion to move to keep the tax rate at 0.95, would you vote for that?
Is that possible? The way, did Roger explain it in a way that wasn't possible? It's a sincere question.
Well, I think that my understanding is that 4-1 or 5-0, if we could have 0.95.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't in good conscience, because this is what happened last year. Community policing was not included in the budget, and that was the primary reason I voted against last year's budget. So I will be voting against the budget. I'm willing to compromise on all these things, but I will not, I can't, given what I've heard from the community this last few years, I can't vote for a budget that doesn't include community policing. That's exactly what I said last year, and I would be inconsistent if I didn't maintain that position. I happen to believe that position as well. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not trying to be difficult, but it was a 3-2 vote last year. And my no vote was because of the lack of inclusion of community policing. So
You may end up losing many, many, many.
I need a motion to put it back on the table.
Move to put the
street lighting because they want to go against the street lighting because I don't want to vote for a millage increase. I will vote for the millage increase. Well,
You're really going to save tax dollars.
you.
but why is it always about community policing? It seems like this, I understand you don't like it, but that's fine. But there's several other things on this add-on list that we could talk about.
But that's the one I disagree with. That's the one I think is least needed of all the things.
And the
You
So-
may end up losing many, many, many of these projects because I'll change my vote, but then Jim is going to change his vote. So we may be to the point where we cut a lot of these things that you'd like to see done.
Well,
And you're really going to save tax dollars. Then
I
you,
guess I don't understand why no one, you say you're bending, but all you're doing is you're threatening community policing. That's all you're doing. You're, you know, if it means that I have to go another year without community policing,
But you might not only have to go without community policing, you might not get your light project started.
well, we might not get a fishing pier. We might not get Bay Oaks personnel. We may not, there's not a lot of other things. You're just saying that one item. You're choosing one item on here.
I'm saying that.
You're doing the same thing that you're accusing me of.
Dan, your one vote is going to set into effect things tumbling downhill. 3 of us will change our vote, then Jim will change his vote. Things are just going to keep tumbling until many things end up having to be cut. Because it's
Well,
a
here's
cause
what I'm
and
gonna do.
effect.
Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm not only gonna tell you what I'm gonna do this year, but I'm gonna probably tell you what's gonna happen next year. There's going to be another millage increase because we're gonna find out that to do the Bay Oaks building is gonna cost far more money than what we expected to. That money's gonna have to come from somewhere. We can all solution, but at the end of the day, if it's gonna mean that the most important thing on here, the 2 most important things on here, without a doubt, are the beach renourishment and the street lighting. We all have heard it. And if there's any possible doubt that from what I've heard, is the majority is going to go against the street lighting because they want to go against the street lighting because I don't want to vote for a millage increase. I will vote for the millage increase because I think the street lighting is more important than anything else on here.
Okay, do I hear you saying then, Dan, that we can vote to approve the budget as is and then
go back.
go for 0.99?
I will do that.
Okay.
Good man.
Are we ready? Mr. Sanabria, do we need to table and go back?
We're gonna go
Yes.
back.
I'm going to just have one thing. I'm still not convinced about the additional personnel at Bayos.
Bill, don't do this.
Just saying,
It's $45,000 this year, Bill.
yeah, but then it becomes a $200,000 a
We could
year
revisit that.
fee
We
that's
could
like,
revisit that then.
Next year.
Sure.
so we hire people for a quarter and the next year we have another
Well-
recurring fee.
Well, we lose people all the time, so, we may just wind up replacing people, but wouldn't be the end of the world if we, through attrition, we don't fully fund the positions next year, and through attrition, we get back to the number you're comfortable with.
Okay, is there a motion